Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. My name is James. I was the guy everyone envied, the husband with the steady career, the picture-perfect family, and a life that seemed to flow without the complications that twist others into bitter cynics. Diane, my wife, was vibrant and full of charm, with a wit that could disarm anyone. I had married her a decade ago, bringing her daughter, Sonia, under my wing. We weren't just a family, we were a team, or so I believed. That belief carried me through our routines, from workdays bustling with the mundane to weekends filled with laughter and warmth. Sonia, now 19, was the daughter I'd never had but loved fiercely. Diane was my partner in everything, from hosting friends for wine-soaked dinners to quiet moments spent planning vacations by the beach or in the mountains. Life, it seemed, had played its cards generously with me. But that day in the garage marked the first crack in the veneer. Spring had just started to push winter out, and with it came the yearly urge to tidy up and make space. Our garage had turned into a depository for memories and forgotten clutter, boxes of Sonia's childhood toys, old camping gear, and, I assumed, a collection of things Diane had amassed during her work trips. "Let's see what we can clear out," I muttered to myself as I lifted a dusty suitcase. It was Diane's, one I'd never seen her use on her regular trips. I almost put it aside, thinking it was filled with the usual, old clothes or documents. But something made me pause. It wasn't curiosity, not yet, it was just the routine of checking before deciding to donate or discard. The zipper resisted at first, like it held secrets too heavy to release. But it finally gave, revealing an assortment of items that shouldn't have been there. My eyes locked on a small bundle of postcards, each marked with places Diane had never mentioned visiting: San Francisco, Austin, Chicago. My chest tightened as I turned them over, seeing short notes scrawled in her unmistakable handwriting. Notes to herself, perhaps, or to someone else. I sat down, the suitcase still open, its silent accusations glaring up at me. The laughter from inside the house echoed faintly through the walls. Diane was on the phone, her voice light, carefree. I felt detached, as if floating above myself, watching my hand reach out and shuffle through the postcards, small souvenirs, and a journal that lay at the bottom. I didn't read it then. Not because I didn't want to, but because I couldn't. The air felt thick, my breathing shallow. The garage, usually my domain, now seemed foreign, the walls pressing in as if sharing some dreadful secret. I closed the suitcase and slid it behind a stack of winter tires, my mind already spinning with questions I wasn't ready to face. The dinner that night was routine, almost offensively so. Diane set the table while I grilled chicken out back, Sonia reading on the porch swing. The scent of rosemary and char filled the warm evening air. Diane smiled at me through the kitchen window, her expression unguarded, trusting. It nearly undid me. I responded with a smile that felt wrong, foreign. "Smells good, Dad." Sonia called out, her face lighting up with that familiar grin. I nodded, forcing a casual wave, but my hand trembled. That night, as Diane slid into bed beside me, murmuring about some client's antics, I stared at the ceiling, barely hearing her words. The suitcase sat in the dark garage, waiting. I told myself it was nothing, a misunderstanding. Diane traveled often for her job in pharmaceuticals, always bouncing between cities for meetings and conferences. She'd come home tired, with stories of bland presentations and cold hotel rooms. But as sleep eluded me, the memory of those souvenirs gnawed at me. I told myself to let it go, that trust was the foundation of our life. Yet, when Diane's breathing steadied and she fell into the depths of sleep, I slipped from bed and crept to the garage. The cold metal of the suitcase handle felt like a challenge. This time, I opened it without hesitation and lifted the journal. My hands moved on their own, flipping through the pages. They were filled with entries spanning years. Notes about hotel stays that didn't match up with what she'd told me. Mentions of laughter shared in bars and fleeting names: Jeremy, Madison, Orlando. A chill rippled down my spine as it all started to piece together, puzzle pieces that painted a picture I didn't want to see. I read enough to know it was real before the journal slipped from my hands, landing in the open suitcase like an accusation. Jeremy. She had mentioned him only once, in passing, a coworker she met at a conference. Nothing important. Nothing worth remembering. I sat on the cold floor, my heart thundering in my ears. Outside, a car passed by, headlights slicing through the thin gap under the garage door. The world moved on, indifferent to the wreckage within these four walls. My body was numb, but the storm inside had only begun to stir. The world outside our house remained oblivious to the chaos that had quietly begun brewing within its walls. Morning arrived, carrying with it the same routines I had taken for granted for years. The smell of coffee drifted through the kitchen, and the rhythmic clatter of breakfast preparations echoed, normal and reassuring. But my world had shifted in the dark hours of the night, and the normalcy felt like a cruel joke. Diane stood at the counter, her hair swept into a ponytail, humming a tune I couldn't place. She glanced up when she noticed me, her smile bright, unaware of the distance I felt between us. It made my stomach turn. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said, pouring me a cup of coffee. I forced a smile that didn't touch my eyes. "Morning," I replied, taking the cup with hands that trembled just enough for me to notice. Diane's attention moved to Sonia, who was breezing into the kitchen, still dressed in her pajama shorts and an oversized tee. "Plans for today?" Diane asked her. "Not much. Might go see Chloe later," Sonia said, reaching for a banana. She looked at me and paused, her brow furrowing as if she sensed something was off. But then she shrugged, the moment passing as quickly as it had come. "Good idea," Diane chimed in. "It's beautiful out. You should take advantage of the weather." She turned to me, her eyes meeting mine with practiced affection. "You too, James. Maybe a bike ride after work?" I nodded mutely. The weight of the night's discovery sat like a stone in my chest, pressing harder with each passing second. I needed to act, but I wasn't sure how or when. Work was a blur, a cascade of phone calls, emails, and meetings that barely registered. My mind replayed the names, the cities, the details I'd read in Diane's journal. Jeremy. Orlando. Austin. The city names, woven into the fabric of her so-called work life, gnawed at me. I could picture her there, sharing moments with someone else, laughter and touches that were never meant to be his. The drive home was torture. Each mile brought me closer to a confrontation I hadn't prepared for. The garage loomed as I parked and stepped out, the suitcase still hidden behind the tires. The chill of discovery crept over me, urging me to face what I'd learned head-on. I walked into the house and found Diane in the living room, curled up with her tablet. The sight of her, so comfortable and unworried, made my hands clench. "Hey, you're home early," she said, glancing up with a smile. But she paused, her smile fading when she saw my expression. "What's wrong?" I stood there for a moment, silent, fighting the rage bubbling beneath my skin. The walls around us seemed to close in, waiting for my words. I had planned to be calm, to choose my moment carefully, but the sight of her, so at ease, tore through my composure. "I found your suitcase," I said, my voice low and strained. Diane's eyes widened slightly, just a flicker, but enough for me to catch. She set down her tablet, the muscles in her jaw tightening. "What suitcase?" she asked, her tone measured. "The one in the garage," I said, stepping closer. "Full of postcards, souvenirs from places you never mentioned. And a journal." She flinched as if I'd struck her. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw fear. It vanished quickly, replaced by something colder. "You went through my things," she snapped, standing up. The shift in her voice, the sudden sharpness, sent a pulse of anger through me. "I had to, Diane. Because I knew something was wrong, and you weren't going to tell me." Her eyes darted to the doorway where Sonia's shadow appeared, watching silently. Diane's face tightened, and she glanced at me with a plea I wasn't willing to acknowledge. "Not now, James," she whispered, but I shook my head. "Now," I insisted, louder than intended. Sonia stepped fully into the room, eyes wide and confused. "What's going on?" she asked. Diane took a breath, regaining some control. She turned to Sonia, her voice softening. "It's fine, sweetheart. Just go to your room for now." But Sonia didn't move. She looked between us, her face pale. "No. I want to know what's happening." Diane hesitated, and I saw the moment she realized there was no easy way out. The truth was already unfurling in the air between us. "It's about your mother's work trips," I said, unable to keep the bitterness from my voice. Diane shot me a look of warning, but I didn't stop. "The ones that weren't work at all." Sonia's face twisted in confusion, then disbelief as realization dawned. She looked at Diane, searching for denial or explanation, but none came. Diane's eyes glistened, and her posture slumped as if the weight of secrets had finally become too much. "Mom," Sonia whispered, the hurt palpable. "I didn't want you to find out like this," Diane said, her voice cracking. Anger surged through me. "How did you want her to find out, Diane? By pretending everything was fine while you kept sneaking off to Orlando? To see him?" The room fell silent, the accusation lingering like smoke. Diane looked down, unable to meet our eyes. Sonia's shoulders stiffened. "Is it true?" she asked, voice barely a whisper. Diane's silence spoke louder than any denial could. My chest ached with a mix of betrayal and fury. "How long?" I asked, my voice shaking. Diane's gaze rose to meet mine, eyes red-rimmed and tired. 5 years, she said finally, the confession landing like a blow. The air between us thickened with grief, anger, and the stark realization that life as we knew it was gone. The room stood frozen in the silence that followed Diane's confession. Time itself seemed to pause as if stunned by the words just spoken. 5 years. Half a decade of deceit, of stolen moments, and lies disguised as business trips. My mind raced, mapping out every memory, every time she'd been away, and every reassured smile she'd given me upon her return. Sonia was the first to break the silence, a choked sound escaping her lips as tears welled up in her eyes. 5 years, she echoed, her voice cracking. She looked at Diane with disbelief, her hands shaking. "Why, Mom? How could you do this?" Diane reached out instinctively, but Sonia flinched back, a reaction that made Diane's arm drop as if it weighed a ton. "It wasn't supposed to be this way," Diane whispered. "I never meant for it to go this far." "Then what did you mean?" My voice cut through the tension, sharp and angry. I couldn't keep the bitterness from spilling over. "What did you think would happen when you decided that your family wasn't enough?" Diane's face crumpled, and for a fleeting moment, she looked as broken as I felt. But that sympathy lasted a heartbeat. My anger surged again, fueled by the years of trust she'd so easily shattered. "I was lonely," she began, the cliché hanging between us like a noose. "It started with feeling unappreciated. You were always so busy, James. Working late, focusing on your projects, the house, everything but us." My blood boiled at her attempt to shift the blame. "So you found someone who wasn't busy? Someone who could give you attention? That's your excuse?" "It's not an excuse," she said, eyes locking onto mine with a defiance that stung. "It's an explanation." The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. Sonia's face had turned red, streaked with tears she hadn't bothered to wipe away. She looked at me, and then at Diane, betrayal and confusion twisting her features. "I covered for you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I lied for you, thinking you were doing something important, something good for our family." Diane's composure faltered as Sonia's words sank in. I never wanted to drag you into this, she said, stepping toward Sonia, but the girl backed away. No, Sonia said, the word trembling with the hurt of a daughter betrayed. You did this. You let this happen, and you used me to cover for your lies. I wanted to comfort Sonia, to tell her she wasn't to blame, but my own anger held me in place, rigid and unmoving. Diane's betrayal felt too fresh, too raw. The realization that Sonia had been complicit, even unknowingly, only deepened the wound. You should go, I said, my voice a mix of exhaustion and finality. Diane's eyes met mine, wide with fear. Pack a bag and go stay somewhere else tonight. I need space to think. She hesitated, eyes flickering with the realization that this was the end of the line. James, please. Let me explain more. We can talk. No, I interrupted, my tone firmer now. We're done talking tonight. Pack your things. Sonia's eyes followed Diane as she moved toward the bedroom, each step heavy with the weight of what she'd done. It was the first time I'd seen Diane reduced to something small, something unsure. The confident, bright woman I'd married had crumbled, revealing someone I barely recognized. When she disappeared from sight, I turned to Sonia. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, eyes full of questions I didn't have answers for. I'm so sorry, Dad, she whispered, voice trembling. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what it really was. I stepped forward, pulling her into a hug. She stiffened at first but then melted into my embrace, sobs shaking her small frame. I know, kiddo, I said, my own voice cracking. None of this is your fault. We stood like that, father and daughter clinging to each other in the shell of a house that felt emptier than it ever had. The sound of Diane packing in the other room punctuated the silence, each drawer opening and closing with a finality that echoed through the hallway. When she emerged, her eyes were swollen, her suitcase in hand. She stopped at the doorway, looking at us one last time. I'm sorry, she said, the words so faint they barely reached us. Just go, I replied, not meeting her eyes. The front door clicked shut behind her, and the silence that followed was suffocating. Sonia and I stood in the living room, surrounded by the ghosts of happier days, the laughter and warmth that had once filled these rooms now replaced with a chilling emptiness. Will we be okay? Sonia asked, voice small, eyes searching mine for reassurance. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. Yeah, I said, though my voice wavered. We'll be okay, eventually. The house felt colder that night, the echoes of our pain reverberating through the dark. Sonia went to her room, but I stayed in the living room, the silence pressing down on me. I glanced at the family photos on the mantel, the smiles, the vacations, the Christmas mornings. All memories that now felt like lies. But beneath the anger, buried deep under the betrayal, was something else. A sliver of resolve. I had lost too much already to let this define me. As I sat in the dark, the numbness gave way to a determination that I hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just an ending, it was the start of something new, something that would test every part of me. Tomorrow, I would begin piecing together what Diane's betrayal had torn apart. But tonight, I let myself feel the full weight of it all, knowing that to move forward, I had to face the pain head-on. The days after Diane left were both a blur and agonizingly clear. Every corner of the house seemed haunted by what we'd lost. The coffee mug she favored sat untouched, the faint scent of her perfume lingered in the hallway, and Sonia's laughter, once the music that filled the gaps of our lives, had quieted. We were a broken pair, moving through routines without the glue that once held our fragile existence together. Sonia was resilient, or at least that was the face she put on. I caught her staring out the window, eyes unfocused, her thoughts miles away. She never spoke of Diane, and I couldn't bring myself to ask. My own anger was a wildfire that had burned through my resolve, leaving only ash and exhaustion behind. Weeks turned into months, and Diane's absence became a presence of its own, a gaping hole that shifted with us. I busied myself with work and house projects, distractions that kept my hands moving and my mind occupied. Sonia finished high school and started planning for college, the momentum of her life pushing forward as if on autopilot. But late at night, when the quiet settled like a heavy blanket, I heard her crying through the thin walls, and my heart broke anew each time. One night, there was a knock at the door that shattered the silence. It was unexpected, and my gut tightened with a sense of foreboding. I opened the door to find Diane standing there, looking like a ghost of herself. Her hair was unkempt, eyes hollow, cheeks sallow from sleepless nights. She held a crumpled piece of paper in her hand, and for a moment, I thought she might collapse. "James," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I need to talk to you. Please." I stood in the doorway, gripping the edge as if it was the only thing keeping me upright. Every instinct told me to shut the door, to banish her back to whatever hell she'd built for herself. But something in her eyes made me pause. This wasn't just regret or an attempt at reconciliation. This was desperation. "Come in," I said finally, stepping aside. Diane moved past me, her body small and hesitant, as if she didn't know if she belonged there anymore. Sonia appeared in the hallway, eyes wide and lips parted as she took in the sight of her mother. "Mom." The word was barely a sound, but it cut through the room like a blade. Diane's face crumpled, tears welling up and spilling over. "Sonia," she said, her voice breaking. She took a step forward, then stopped, clutching the paper in her hand as if it were a lifeline. "I need to tell you both something," Diane said, glancing at me and then back at Sonia. She swallowed hard. "I didn't come back to ask for forgiveness. I know that's impossible now." The room held its breath. I felt a chill run down my spine, a warning of what was to come. "I'm sick," she said, finally holding up the paper, which I now realized was a hospital report. "They found it last month. I thought it was just stress, that it was something I could manage, but it's advanced. There's nothing they can do." The silence that followed was suffocating. I watched Sonia's face fall, disbelief morphing into shock. She turned to me, eyes pleading for this to be some cruel joke, but I could only stand there, stunned. Diane took another step forward, the weight of her confession pressing her down. "I know I don't deserve anything from you," she said, her voice trembling. "But I had to come. I needed you both to know. I didn't want to disappear without telling you." Anger, sadness, and a twisted sense of vindication warred within me. I wanted to yell, to scream at her for everything she'd taken from us. But looking at her now, broken and dying, I felt my anger slip away, replaced by a hollow ache. The woman who had betrayed me, who had shattered our family, was now being taken by something none of us could fight. Sonia crossed the room before I could stop her, throwing her arms around Diane and sobbing into her shoulder. Diane collapsed into her embrace, weeping openly, her fingers tangled in Sonia's hair as if she were trying to anchor herself to the moment, to the life that was slipping away from her. I looked away, unable to bear the sight. Memories of the life we'd once shared flooded back, the laughter, the vacations, the mornings filled with whispered conversations and shared coffee. It felt cruel, unfair that it should end like this, with so many words left unsaid. In the weeks that followed, Diane moved back in. Not as my wife, not as the woman who had shattered my heart, but as a fragile, fading shadow of herself. Sonia tended to her with a love I couldn't understand, but I let it happen, knowing she needed that closure more than I needed my pride. The day Diane passed was quiet. Sonia was with her, holding her hand, whispering reassurances that she was loved. I stood at the doorway, watching the last breath leave Diane's body, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. The house, once full of anger and betrayal, now felt unbearably empty. After the funeral, Sonia and I sat in the living room, the silence between us thick with shared grief. "Do you think she was sorry?" Sonia asked, her voice barely audible. I looked at her, my eyes tired, my heart worn. Yes, I said, though I wasn't sure if it was true. Maybe she was, or maybe she wasn't. But in the end, it didn't matter. We had loved her once, and that was enough to carry us forward, broken but still breathing. And as the sun set on another day, I realized that some wounds never truly heal. They fade, they scar, but they stay. And we learn to live with them, even when it hurts.